Comments and opinions expressed on Writers in Focus are those of the individual participants and are presented for the purpose of discussion only. No endorsements by Atlanta Fulton Public Library System or Fulton County government are intended, and none should be presumed. Hi, welcome to Writers in Focus. I'm your host, James Taylor, and today I'm delighted to have as my guests Ashley Merryman and Bronson. May I call you Ashley?
Of course. Hi.
Poe?
Thank you, James.
Real name Philip, if I recall?
Born Philip, but
Philip.
It's never been used Philip by anybody except for the Department of Motor Vehicles of the states of Washington and California.
I'd like to welcome you to the Atlanta Fulton Public Library and to the Fulton County Government Center. We're here to talk about your wonderful book, Top Dog, The Science of Winning and Losing. By way of introduction, together, your last book, Nurture Shock, was a New York Times bestseller, was translated into 16 languages and sold more than 200,000 copies. It changed, in my estimation, how we think about raising our children. Individually, Poe Bronson is an acclaimed novelist, journalist, and author of what I think is your most widely known book, What Should I Do With My Life? Ashley Merryman is an attorney, a former speechwriter for a great president, and an inveterate researcher. Top Dog, The Science of Winning and Losing. I've seen a lot of interviews about the book lately. Poe and Ashley, the critics say it's about competition. I'm going to set it out for me. The book is about why we must understand a basic drive of human behavior. Call it the competitive spirit. In your first or second chapter, you call it aritas. What is aritas? Do you want to start? Or?
Well, you know, it's interesting when we were talking about competition, you know, we would even say we were working on a book about competition and people say, oh, is it good or bad? And we were just like, no, it is. You know, I mean, competition is just part of our lives that we have to deal with. But it was interesting. I think we don't have any problem with President Obama saying the nation needs to be more competitive.
Right.
Even if you don't like Obama, you still agree with that sentence, right? But when we apply it to people, it's a little more complicated, right? Michael Phelps can be competitive, but you know, your girlfriend playing out in board games or someone in a parking space, not so much. So what we did is we actually were looking for the ancient Greeks were the sort of the first society to celebrate competition. And they actually had the greatest virtue was called aritas. And aritas is, I think, mistranslated often to be excellence. But it's really about how competition is, through competition, you learn to do your very best. It teaches you how to have strategies, to have leadership. It teaches you to use everything you've been learning and problem solving and to have character. So the Greeks actually thought the competitive experience taught morality, whereas we right now, I think, are sort of worried that it leads to immoral behavior, and it just doesn't.
Poe, both of you make the point, of course, but let's just put your cards on the table. The difference between maladaptive competition and adaptive competition. Philosophically, the word competition is value-laden. Oh, you compete too much, it's bad for you.
Right.
But it ain't.
Right. Well, adaptive competition is anything that produces positive effects, and maladaptive competition is one that's producing negative effects. Adaptive competitiveness is one where you understand fundamentally that you have a dual respect with your opponent, and that you recognize that it pushes us to our best performance, that we all want to be intrinsically motivated, right? We want to have our internal drive, but try as we hardest as we can to push ourselves, we do yet better when we have to compare ourselves and push ourselves against others. And that's the benefit of competition, and to recognize that even though one of us wins and one of us loses, is that we both get better through competing. And that this force in our lives is driving us all to get better at things. It's not just tearing us down. Maladaptive competitiveness is that kind of behavior where you see where someone can't turn it off, where they have to be the best at everything, not just be a great surgeon, but also, you know, blow everybody away on the tennis courts on the weekends. Healthy competitive skills is to conserve your energy for the battles that really matter, not to spread it everywhere and have to win all the time.
And forgive me for saying this. I read a lot of books, and people come into the library and they check out the books, and I go into bookstores all the time. There are rows upon rows of self-help books. What distinguishes your book, and I want to look in the camera when I say this, is that your findings, your theses, your perceptions are based upon empirical data. It's kind of new. I want to be clear on this. Both of you wrote a book on nurture shock, and you were involved in that debate about self-esteem and what do you tell your kids, and then you have people like Malcolm Gladwell writing about outliers and saying you need 10,000 hours of experience to practice to be good. Is that where the book started, the idea in your head that there's something missing about human behavior? We have to address competition?
Well, yes. I mean, when we were talking about nurture shock, people were telling...
I'm belaboring this point because I want the audience to understand.
Yeah.
Right. You know, we would hear all the time, you know, my kid's soccer team doesn't keep score. But we were like, but the kids keep score. Right.
Right.
And, you know, is it good to give everybody trophies? Well, no. The research says it's not good to give everybody trophies because it's an illusion. Some kids succeeded and want to be recognized, and some kids struggle and they want to be recognized that they may need help. Not just reassured everything's wonderful. And, you know, personally, we're both very competitive people. And
we'll get to that, because it's the two of you, you know.
But, you know, I mean, there were questions in terms of, you know, what is competition in the role of our lives? And what does the science tell us that can help us understand it?
The book begins with a bang. And let me see if I can reconstruct. You open the book, introduction, but wait a second. You're claiming, these authors are claiming that the same stress that is felt by free-falling parachutists is felt by ballroom dancers, and then the book just takes off.
Yeah.
What is that all about?
Well, so to skydive towards Earth at 120 miles an hour, as someone who's never done it before, you would think of that as one of the most stressful things you could experience, right? And they measure that. They measure the stress hormones through having people in those planes right before they jump and right after they jump chew a little salivette, and then they put that in a test tube and they measure all that stuff. Simultaneously, in another part of Germany, another scholar was taking hobbyists, ballroom dancers. It's not the dancing that's stressful for them. It's not the physical movements. It's the sense of being judged. It's the sense that you're doing this in front of an audience and that all the competitors are also doing this, and that, you know, in that moment you must be perfect. And they found that that experience was just as stressful as the parachuting. More important was that even those who had, as Malcolm Gladwell had noted, 10 years of experience, you know, 10 years of competing in ballroom dancing competitions, they still had just as much stress pushing through their bodies as the skydivers did and as the novices did. And it turns out that it suggested to us that 10,000 hours in 10 years is not the secret to performing. That's the secret to just maybe getting good at the first place. But when you actually compete, you are going up against other people who also have 10,000 hours of experience. And if you haven't, they haven't either. I mean, really, none of us get to wait 10 years before we have to perform. We have to perform often in the very first few months before we're ever learning a new skill. And we wanted to know what makes someone good at that. What makes someone be able to, you know, handle it when the lights are on, the lights are bright, and people are watching.
A lot of people don't realize this, Ashley. That I could have this wrong, but you are the librarian in this organization. I mean, you're the one who studies. You're the one who assembles the data. There was like 35 pages of data in your book. I mean,
the sources.
So when I say source, folks, I'm not talking about the empirical studies, social science studies, professional sports medicine studies, psychological studies, endocrinological, I can't even say it, studies. I love the book because when you make pronouncements, it's backed up by data. How did you find all this data? Is it just, how do you do that? And I'm a librarian.
Well, we both, you know, I mean, it's not just me, it's both of us. And we're reading thousands of journal articles. We go to scientific conferences and we ask the scientists, what are you working on, not just what's the research? And, you know, we're reading a ton of material and we're interviewing and we're looking and working all the time.
We also generate a lot of questions. So we will spend, Ashley lives in Los Angeles, I live in San Francisco. We will spend a good 3 hours a day on the phone, and a lot of that time is spent asking questions, like recognizing, like we're just talking about an audience. What is the effect of an audience? Why does having an audience sometimes make you perform better and sometimes make you perform worse? Why one and not the other?
Okay, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Folks, the book is filled with this data. Okay, you've got a child who wants to go to a good college. That's another story. Is he a boy or is he a girl? What kind of college does he go to? But you got to take those SATs. Instead of the parent asking like, study for the SATs, the parent might want to ask, where are you taking the SATs?
Right.
Talk about, do you want to talk about
Sure.
that?
So
I love that.
It's any competitiveness and that competitive focus and that motivation is affected by how many people you're competing against. So in simplest terms, when you're competing against a lot of people, it can feel very hard to win, very hard to feel one of the best. And the most intriguing phenomenon is when you take the SAT as a high schooler in a crowded room with a lot of other test takers, scores actually go down. And when you take it in a room with not many other test takers, scores go up. Now, of course, high schoolers know everybody in the country is taking the test on this particular Saturday. But to face it in person changes their psychology, which is affecting their performance. You know, it's quite amazing that we see that. You see, this is not just an SAT data. It's been backed up with a lot of Michigan standardized tests and backed up in lab experiments. It's quite pronounced.
And Ashley, let me ask you this, because I told you I would date myself, but years ago in the early 1960s, Ashley Montague wrote a book about the national superiority of women. Your book seems to bear that out. Women take risks, but they take risks differently from men. Would you want to handle that one?
Well,
I love that.
I do too. But you know, it's interesting. I think in some ways it is an advantage to women. In some ways it's absolutely a disadvantage. It depends on the context. And what it turns out is, you know, because I had been told, as you know, growing up and you know, going to college and in my professional life, you know, women really aren't that competitive, and our strengths is coalition building.
They didn't go to my high school, but that's okay.
Well, they didn't go to mine either, and I was like, who are you giving this book to? I'm really competitive. Are you telling me I'm a bad girl because I'm being competitive? And the research, actually, neither of us really wanted to look at the gender research. I have to tell you, for me, it just made me angry. He was also thinking that it wasn't representative of the women he knew in his life, his mom, his wife, his daughter. And every time I saw, you know, women are less competitive, I just went crazy because I couldn't figure out what it was. But when we dove deeper into the research, what we found is that it turns out women are more calculating about whether or not they're going to win. And they decide whether or not they're going to compete based on that assessment. And they just refuse to waste time losing. Once they feel like, I'm going to win, they're in it, maybe even more than the men. But men have a lower standard in terms of what the requirements are for winning. So in contexts like politics, women's calculation about whether or not I'm going to, you know, win is going to hurt their careers. You know, research with Sarah Fulton, a researcher at Texas A&M, she found that men who were, you know, at the state legislature and even interested about Congress said, yeah, I'm going to run. And women said, I'm only going to run if I think I'm going to win. But incumbents win. You know, incumbents win 95% of the time. Most women are going to say, no, I'm not going to do that. The big election success last November, new highs in women's participation, still only 18%. Only 4 women filled out the forms out of the entire country saying, I want to run for governor. They weren't actually running, they didn't make 4 women, that's it. But in another context, like Wall Street, women are actually better financial analysts than men because they're looking at the odds of success. They want to be really sure that their numbers are accurate.
Oh, I saw you in an interview one time. You were talking about your experience as an investment banker, and you said sometimes it's good for a man, scientifically proven to be reckless, to make those extraordinary gambles where a woman...
Well, on Wall Street, I would argue that that's not a healthy thing, and that's caused us a lot of problems. I would say that Wall Street firms sometimes, one of the questions is, if women make better financial analysts, why aren't there more than 16% of the financial analysts that are female? And one argument is that Wall Street doesn't want their analysts to be accurate. It wants them to tout its stocks and to inflate their perceived value because of the investment banking relationships. And that certainly was the game before the 2003 global settlement. And there's still some suggestion that's still some part of the game today. But in an environment like Silicon Valley, because I live in San Francisco, and we treasure the risk taker. And here, certainly there's a boys' club element to Silicon Valley, and there's also a gender difference in who's taking the engineering courses and coming out of the universities engineers in the first place. But if you take this risk difference in Silicon Valley, you start to see how it could be at work. Women tend to judge, anything below, in politics, the chance of winning below 20%, women don't enter political races. Well, Silicon Valley startups, the odds are never over 20%. They're typically 10%. That's considered the right level of odds and return.
Right.
And it could be that one of the reasons the percent of venture capital funded startups founded by women is only 7.3%, or 4.3%. One possibility is that women are seeing those 1 in 10 odds and saying this isn't good enough for me, even if it's good enough for the venture capitalists.
How do you respond? And this is one of my bete noirs in life. A lot of people come into the studio and the authors will write about the secret is the success is the law of attraction. The way to get ahead is to be like Attila the Hun and cut the head off your opponent. You have a chapter on, you're not debunking the power of positive thinking, but how do you look upon this notion, like if you visualize, if you have a dream map of something? I think you know what I'm talking about. Go into any big bookstore and there's a wall of these books.
Yes.
What does the research say about that? And that's what the book is about in many ways.
Well, I actually do think we are sort of debunking the sort of myth of positive thinking.
Thank you.
I actually, and here's the
you hear
reason
that, folks?
why.
Yes.
Because the idea, originally positive thinking started out as part of a religious movement in the 1800s. And it was a belief that if you prayed and believed in God, that good things would happen and he would take care of you. And I'm a very religious person and I have no problem with that. But it got morphed into this idea that, well, you can just never have any negative thoughts in any context, business, romantic life, whatever, and just thinking of negative things will bring them upon you. Right? Just as sure as if I say, don't think about pink elephants, we all think about pink elephants. So you're never allowed to think of negative thoughts. But there's a bunch of problems with that. First, if you never have the negative thought, then you're not going to be able to respond when problems arise. And problems arise. And you will become demoralized because you're saying, but I wasn't even letting myself think about it. So those negative thoughts may actually have more power when they come up to you. Another thing is you need to mentally be prepared for a challenge. There's physiological things that happen when you know this is going to be something I need to do and I need to fight for. And the Olympian, the men's gymnasts who were walking around the Olympic trials, they've asked them, what were you thinking? And the ones who walked around saying, I'm going to be an Olympian, didn't make the squad. It was the ones who said, okay, I screwed up, now I'm going to perform better on this next thing. They're the ones who did it. And the research seems to say it's not, you don't have to be Eeyore. You don't have to walk around, oh, life's pretty terrible. But you need to think, okay, here are good outcomes I can have. Now, what are the obstacles in my way? And figure out how to overcome those obstacles. And the obstacles actually become part of the goal, right? If your goal is to find a new job right now, then you have to say, I'm going to get a really great job, but it's going to be really hard. I'm going to have to send out a lot of resumes, and I'm going to have to go on interviews, and I'm going to maybe have to do education. And those plans then become part of the goal. So even if you don't yet have the job, you can say, but I'm still making progress because I've sent out resumes. If the only thing is, it's all going to be great, having not had that success means it's a failure. If you're anticipating them, it's part of the process.
In reading the book, Poe, I had many, many revelations. So that explains why in the 11th grade, everybody said I was really smart, me. And calculus, I couldn't do it. And I said, nothing had prepared me for that because they said I was smart. And a lot of these aperçus, revelations come out of the book. There's so much research out there. Let me set you up for my next question.
Okay.
There is so much research in your book. And as a reader, I'm reading this, oh, God, look at that. And it's insight after insight. But what do I do with how do I incorporate that into my life? There's not a, am I reading this wrong? There's not a lot of that in the book. You're not saying go out and do this, go out and do that.
It's not a self-help book.
Right.
That's,
yeah. There are no bullet points.
Yeah,
of
you're
tips.
pulling that out.
But there is a lot of ways that it should expect. We expect the reader to echo with the experience of their life to help them revisit those moments where they had to perform, whether it went well or went poorly, and help them explain some of the hidden factors that were at work, that were controlling their response in that moment, and they were not aware of it, right? Whether that's a genetic component that could be at play when they're taking an SAT that they had no idea is going on, or it could be a psychological element such as the importance of rivalries and the way that close rivalries intensify focus and improve competitive performance.
The book works on many, many levels. As I said before the interview, there's a lot in this book. One of my favorite, and this is an easy example, but you see Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. Larry Bird squirms when he sees the Boston Celtics going out there and saying, "Hey, how you doing? Love your game. You know, how's your mother?" and stuff like that. You do that after the game, and you write about that, don't you? In fact, I'm going to say,
very much.
It's called Tend and Befriend.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that, Poe?
Sure. So,
I love it.
So it's because we so see that today
yeah.
in today's NBA stars and the contrast. Or you see it also in baseball today. Players move around. At first base, they're always chatting each other up. You don't see the runner trying to spike the first baseman, you know. They're all being friendly. And when they do that, when you tend and befriend your opponent, you diffuse your natural testosterone response to the moment.
Reading my mind.
Now, not just men. When we hear testosterone, people often think guys and muscles, right? We're talking about both men and women.
I want to hear Ashley talk about testosterone.
Okay, but both men and women, both men and women have this response, and we're talking about its effect on the mind, your perception of the situation. And testosterone readies you to compete. And when you tend and befriend, you diffuse it, you knock it down. And in that sense, you become less ready to truly compete. Yeah. And so when we see something like Dwight Howard of the Lakers go out to center court and high-fiving all these guys on the other team and acting like they're his friends and tweeting them, he's only diffusing that very thing. And that's why you see Kobe Bryant, he's got that kind of like intense focus, and he does not being too friendly with everybody else, and that's why he comes through in the clutch. And that's Larry Bird had that, and he understood that you need to treat them as your enemy during the game. After the game, have a beer, whatever. But it's really undermining.
That's one of my colleagues said it's like boxers, like ooh, before the fight, and then hey, I like you. But I learned so much in this book. There's a concept called anticipatory testosterone in men and women. Could you, as Poe was saying, this is a male game. What are you talking about, testosterone in women? Could you talk about that?
Sure. Well, actually, women, depending on the study and even the time of year, everyone's testosterone fluctuates year to year. On average, women probably have 1/5 to 1/7 the amount of testosterone that men do. But what really is important is not the baseline testosterone, and now we're not talking men or women, it's how much it changes in that anticipation of a competition, a real challenge. So the research says that testosterone should actually be on the decline for men starting in around the age of 40. But we found a study of British surgeons who are aged 42 to 60. And they were specializing in highly complicated, basically surgery where they rebuilt people's faces. So they took pieces of their thigh bone and put it back in the jaw if there was an accident or surgery. And they found that the most complicated surgery, their testosterone increased the morning before by 500%. So it's physically your body getting ready for this preparation, and it's not just physical. We've also seen research that your testosterone increases if you're a chess master anticipating a chess championship. So it actually helps in cognitive ideas. There's a story that testosterone is all about aggression. And really, the research doesn't support that there's a link to testosterone and aggression at all. Testosterone is the chemical way of expressing motivation, and it pushes you to do whatever is valued and gets you social status. That may mean you're really nice to someone, because then they like you more, and then your social status rises. Yeah. So it's not how you respond, it's that preparation for doing something that really is important to you and meaningful. And when that happens, your physiology helps you carry it through.
Poe, I had this thought last night when I'd finished the book and I was going through my notes, and I said, what should people take away from this book. And my feeling is you can read it or not read it, but life goes on, and it's you have to understand this stuff. What you're writing about competition as an intrinsic part of life, whether you know it's there or not. Can you pick up on what I'm trying to say?
We all say that
Thank you.
Our corporations
you guys are great, by the way.
competing, out there in the real world, right? Yeah. And our schools are competing over budget dollars and students and all these things.
We compete at everything we do.
But we wake up and sometimes we just go to work or we just go to class, and we're not aware that we're competing even as we're part of this large competition.
Right.
The forces of competition are there, they're there all the time. Anytime we are comparing ourselves to others, anytime we are trying to achieve our goals, we're aware of others stand, we're really in a competitive context. It never quite totally disappears. Turning it off is important. I mean, it's good that we turn it way down in the appropriate instance. That's adaptive competitiveness, just to pick your battles. But you never escape this. People who think, I'm not competitive, usually when they're reading the book, they go, I do compete. I compete a different way. And this is not a book that says, here is the one way to be a competitor, to be a top dog. It's a book that says, here are all these factors at work, and you can find what are the situations that you compete your best in. What kind of psychological environment brings out your best? Ashley and I are quite different. I'm the kind of guy who likes short, intense, emotional competitions. I like to get under your skin.
I've got to compete with you right now and conclude this interview.
Yeah.
Damn it, Poe. No, I'm just kidding. I have loved talking to you. Ladies and gentlemen, go out and get this book immediately. Go to your bookstore, go to your library, get it online. It's called Top Dog, The Science of Winning and Losing by Poe Bronson and Ashley Merryman. Thank you for being in Atlanta.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's a excellent book. Excellent
Thank you.
book. I hope you do well with it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're right that there's difficulty in the perception of understanding just how it's...
Comments and opinions expressed on Writers in Focus are those of the individual participants and are presented for the purpose of discussion only. No endorsements by Atlanta Fulton Public Library System or Fulton County government are intended, and none should be presumed.